Hello friends, welcome back to the shop, and welcome to this video on pipe mortar. Pipe mortar is a new thing that I've developed that I think is going to be quite useful for both pipe repair and corncob pipe modification. But I want to start this video by saying, I've used this on a few pipes. I've put it through its paces as best I can, but I can't guarantee it in any way. And what I'm really hoping will happen is that you guys will take it on yourselves to try this out in some cobs, maybe in some pipes that you're restoring, and just see how it works. And let me know. Let everybody know. Because if I'm right about this, I think it's going to be a really good alternative to pipe mud, which is a fine thing to use in and of itself. But I think pipe mortar is going to be a bit better. And I'll get into all the reasons why and everything. But we need more testing. We need to have multiple people try this out and give their opinions of it. So I'm hoping that you'll do that. I'm hoping that in the coming months I'll see some videos where some of you guys have tried it and can give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down. And I want to know if it's a thumbs down. I'm not trying to promote anything here. I'm not selling anything. I'm just trying to share information. Also, if you try it and you don't make videos, please let me know in the comments, because we need to collect this information. Especially for guys that are repairing pipes. I don't want people getting pipes with a repair that's shoddy in any way because of something that I think is going to work and it turns out it won't. So thanks in advance for trying this out and for trusting me enough to try it out. I appreciate that. So why did I even bother? Well, I'm smoking this 7Le's Bing's Favorite today, and I'm smoking original Edgeworth Ready Rubbed, which is quite good. Lane Limited Ready Rub is a really good match, but the original stuff is just a slight notch above it. Anyway, this Bing's Favorite is one that you saw me restore, and this had a rather large burnout. It hadn't gone all the way through the bowl, but it was a sufficient gaping hole in the side of the inside of the tobacco chamber that had to be filled with something. And it was on the wall, which is a challenge. And I was able to use pipe mortar to repair this, and it has been smoking wonderfully. And I've really smoked this pipe hard. I smoked it repeatedly for about 2 weeks before I talked about it in a video, and it's performed fantastically. And I've smoked it at least once a week since then. This is going on a couple months now. No issues whatsoever. The other pipe that I worked on, and you can find the video on this as well, and I'll link to both these series down in the comment section, down in the description rather. This is an Aldo Villani that I repaired. Now this guy actually had a burnout going all the way through the bowl, so I made a briar plug and fit that and everything. But on the inside, the area where the burnout had occurred, I ground out all the burnt briar and brought it all down to bare briar, and then patched over that with the pipe mortar. And this pipe has behaved fantastically since then. Again, smoked it hard for about 2 weeks. After that, I've been using it once a week with absolutely no issue. So far in my hands at least, the pipe mortar is doing its job. So why not just use pipe mud? Now, for those of you that don't know, pipe mud is simply a mixture of cigar ash and water. And I have videos on pipe mud in my corncob pipe series, and I'll link to the pipe mud video down below just in case you're interested. For what it is, pipe mud works great. It does a fine job of raising the bottom of the cob after you drill out that shank insert, and it can be used in briar pipes for things like if you start to see spider webbing around the inside of the bowl. I've used it for that, just to sort of fill in the gaps, the small gaps, and provide a surface for cake to form. Now, the problems with pipe mud are that, first off, it takes quite a while to dry. I like to give it at least 2 to 3 days of drying time before I'll even really move the pipe. Certainly before I'll send it to somebody in the mail, because I believe that if I don't wait that long, it's going to be too easy for it to knock loose. It tends to be fairly fragile at first, so you have to run at least, I don't know, 3 or 4 bowls of tobacco through the pipe before cake starts to form and the pipe mud sort of hardens. And once it's hardened, it's pretty robust. But in those early days, it's actually quite easy to break it while you're cleaning the pipe, and you can be careful, and it works great, and there's nothing wrong with it, but I just think an improvement would be helpful. The last thing that's an issue is if you're doing a repair like I had to do on this Bing's Favorite, where there was a large gap on the inner wall. Pipe mud is not very good for that, for filling large gaps on the side, because it doesn't support itself well, and it just basically crumbles pretty quickly, and you're back to where you started. So it's not at all useful for most burnouts. So for that's the main reason that I started to even think about a different approach, was because I had these pipes with burnouts that I wanted to restore. So what I've come up with, and one other why not. Several people have said, why not use furnace mortar or fireplace mortar, various names for this. It's a high temperature mortar that's used in furnaces. And it seems like it would be perfectly suited for the task. It gets quite hard. It's inexpensive. You can get it at any hardware store. It's malleable, sets rock hard, and it's fire resistant. So that's great, and I agree. I think that that's a perfectly reasonable thing for you to use if you're using the pipes yourself. As somebody that repairs and restores pipes for customers, I'm not comfortable using something like fireplace mortar in the tobacco chamber, or really anything in the tobacco chamber, unless I know exactly what it's composed of and I know that it is 100% food safe. I can't say that for fireplace cements. And the thing that you need to keep in mind is, even if you've used it for, let's say you've used it for 10 years and there's never been any problem, the industry making that is not regulated in the same way that an industry making food, or tobacco for that matter, is regulated. And they can change the recipe at will. They can find out there's a cheaper source of something. They may be using ingredients that are perfectly safe now, but they go to a cheaper source and now there's a contaminant in it that could be causing issues. It can change over time without any warning, and I don't like that. Now, again, I'm not trying to discourage people that are already doing it and they think it's great. I don't want to have any arguments about it. So I won't use things like furnace cement myself, and I can't use it for any pipes that I'm repairing for anyone else, because I just don't trust it, or can't trust that it will be consistent over time. Alright, so that's why I thought it was important to come up with a new approach, and I'm calling this approach pipe mortar. Now, the way I'm going to go about this is I'm going to tell you what's in it in just a second, and then I'm going to go through the process of mixing it up, making it, and I'm going to use it to mud this Missouri Meerschaum. I don't actually know what the shape is here, but this Missouri Meerschaum corncob pipe. Just a good exercise to try it out with. I actually haven't used it in a cob yet. I see no reason why it wouldn't work, but we'll find out. So let's get to the nitty-gritty here. What is pipe mud? Well, I've told you in the previous videos that it is entirely food safe and edible, and that's true. Now, the first ingredient is probably going to surprise you, because it's not exactly something you think of as a food item, but I will explain. So the first ingredient is good old hardware store Plaster of Paris. Now, Plaster of Paris is not something you normally think of as a food item, and I admit it's not. You wouldn't want to eat very much Plaster of Paris, but it is actually a food additive. So Plaster of Paris, you have to understand what it is first off. So Plaster of Paris is derived from mineral gypsum, and gypsum is composed of calcium sulfate, calcium carbonate salts, and silicates. So it's rock, really. And the way they make Plaster of Paris is they take this calcium-rich rock and they heat it, and it forms the appropriate hydration salts at a particular temperature. I think they heat it to like 300 or 400 degrees. And then once it transitions to the right state, they crush it into a fine powder, and that's what this is. So this is basically one ingredient. Now, if you read the ingredients list, it tells you that it contains multiple things, 3 things actually. Calcium sulfate hemihydrate, calcium carbonate, and crystalline silica. Well, that's what's in that gypsum mineral rock that they use to begin with. It does tell you, there's a lot of warnings here about avoiding skin and eye contact, and they're all around the fact that this is a very fine powder, and anytime you're dealing with a very fine powder, it can be highly irritative. You don't want to get it in your lungs and all that. So if you do this, be very careful when you're weighing this out. Try not to kick up a lot of dust. If you're clumsy like me, you might want to wear a respirator just to make sure you don't inhale a bunch of this stuff. Now it turns out that gypsum powder, or also known as Plaster of Paris, is a very common food additive, and it's used in a number of things that surprised me, actually. The most surprising one was that it turns out Plaster of Paris is used, oh, I shouldn't say Plaster of Paris, powdered gypsum is used as a food additive in making tofu. So it actually helps coagulate the soy curds into that sort of squishy white stuff that people seem to eat. So it's a soybean curd coagulant, and its use is so predominant that it turns out, and this is what surprised me, that powdered gypsum is the primary source of dietary calcium in many Asian cultures. Now this is true because Asians don't use a lot of dairy products. They are very often lactose intolerant, which is a genetic thing, and they obviously need dietary calcium, and it turns out that they get it from tofu. So it's fascinating that Plaster of Paris is essentially providing dietary calcium for a large group of people. It's also used in the brewing process. It adds hardness to the water that's used in brewing. So if you drink beer, you're drinking some Plaster of Paris. And it's used in baking as a dough conditioner. It reduces stickiness, and it's added to baked goods as a source of dietary calcium. So again, it's something that you're probably ingesting more Plaster of Paris on a daily basis than you would ever be exposed to by the little bit that you're going to be putting in your pipe. It's perfectly safe. The other two ingredients are even more obviously safe. First is just good old table salt. I use iodized. It doesn't have to be iodized, but it has to be table salt. Don't use kosher salt. Don't use sea salt. Just get cheap, regular Morton's table salt. And that's added because it turns out that table salt has a really interesting effect. Well, salt has a really interesting effect on Plaster of Paris. It speeds up the hardening time, so it will harden more rapidly, and it also makes it harder once it is hardened. So it has some nice properties, and for us, it's going to add it's going to be an additional benefit because we want the salt to be fully dissolved, and you'll be able to very easily see the salt crystals as you're mixing. So you keep adding water and mixing until the salt crystals are gone. And that's how you know when your pipe mortar is ready to use. The third ingredient, and this is the one that's kind of magical, and a little bit less common, a little bit harder to find, but not impossible, is activated charcoal. This is activated coconut charcoal because it's made from coconut shells, but you can get activated charcoal on eBay, you can get it through Amazon. Any health food store is going to sell it. That's where I got this. People use this in all sorts of ways that, I'm a scientist, so I don't really buy into all the holistic medicine stuff, but people were taking this because they think it's going to cleanse their blood of impurities and everything else. It is a digestive aid. It's basically very, very porous carbon, and it's a very fine, very porous carbon. It's highly absorptive. So if you, for example, let's say you have excessive gas in your digestive system, you take some of this, it will absorb the gas very effectively. It actually is used in medicine. If somebody is poisoned, they, depending on the poison, of course, they may administer activated charcoal to absorb that poison. So it's got its uses. It's popular right now for health food reasons that may or may not be important, but that's not important for us. What is important for us is that it's a very good source of very fine carbon that mixes very well with the other ingredients, and that's going to provide an excellent surface for cake to begin to form. And that's what we want. We want something that's tough, that's going to stay in place, and that's going to seed the cake formation. And this, by the way, is used by many folks that make pipes as an ingredient in the bowl coating. So it's not something new to be adding to a pipe, and the reason they use it is that it's an excellent surface to begin the formation of cake. All right, so what we're going to do is those are your three ingredients: plaster of Paris, salt, activated charcoal. And you can find all of these things at stores near you, certainly on eBay or Amazon. Alright, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and prepare this cob, and I'm going to prepare that by simply taking a 3/4 inch Forstner bit and drilling down until I get rid of that shank and extension that's in the bowl. And then I will weigh out the ingredients. I'll bring you back with the overhead view, and I'll tell you what the weights are for each one, show you how to mix it. We'll put it in the cob, and we'll see how it goes. So I'll be back in a second. So that 3/4 inch Forstner bit really makes easy work of removing that shank insert. And you can see in this case the shank insert actually goes a bit below the level of the cob at the bottom. So I left a little bit of wood in there. That's okay, because it's going to have a pretty significant layer of the pipe mortar on top of it. So that will not be an issue at all. And actually, let me demonstrate that. So take the stem off. Come on, there we go. Hey, how'd that get in there? So I've got, this is one of the tools that I made for like reaming the inside of shanks when I'm refurbishing pipes, but it's just an 11/64 inch drill bit. You can use any drill bit that fits, even just a rod of some sort. You're just going to need something that you can bring through to establish that airway once the pipe mortar is in place. But I'm doing this now just to show you that that is well above the bottom of that, where that little bit of wood is still remaining. So we're well clear of where the pipe mortar is going to be, and you're never going to burn through to that wood. So if you're one of the people that don't like the taste of that wood burning, this method will definitely help you out. So the next step then is to actually make the pipe mortar, and I've got the three components weighed out here, and I'm going to tell you what the weights are. And unfortunately, I tried to come up with a way to do this like in teaspoons or something like that, and I just couldn't get it accurate enough. You know, I started to get into variables like how densely it was packed and stuff like that. If you're going to do this, I highly recommend you get a scale that can weigh in grams or ounces and use the weights. But you'll see that, you know, we can maybe make some rough guesses, and you could try it without doing that if you don't have access to a scale. So this is 1 gram of the plaster of Paris. This is 1/2 gram of the table salt, and this is I can get them all in shot here. This is 0.6 grams of the activated carbon or activated charcoal. Now, the most important ratios here, I believe, are the ratio from the plaster of Paris and the activated charcoal. So you basically want that to be a 1 to 0.6 ratio if you can. You know, you can see it's difficult to gauge because these all are different. They pack differently, so I really can't tell you to use 1 part this and half that, and you can do it by volume. You can't do it by volume. So really, the best way is to go ahead and get yourself a little scale. You can get them fairly cheap, and measure out 1 gram of plaster of Paris, 1/2 gram of table salt, and 0.6 grams of activated charcoal. Now, I played with this quite a bit with different numbers and things, different ingredients as well, so I didn't just start off with these three. This turned out to be the best of probably about 15 different variations that I tried, and I think that there's some tolerance for, if this was 1.2 grams and this was 0.5 grams, it'd probably be okay, but this is what worked best, so that's what I'm going to tell you to use. And again, I highly recommend you get a little scale. Okay, to mix this up, I'm going to use, this is a little thing that I got for free at Harbor Freight, actually. It's one of these little magnetic backed bowls, but I like using it for mixing these sorts of things because it's got the scooped edges that make it easy to keep everything in the center. And we're just going to combine the powders at first. So I'll start with the plaster, bring that into shot here. And the salt, the order is not important because we're going to mix them all up. Just make sure you get everything out. And then the activated charcoal. Now this activated charcoal is a mess if you get it like splashed around stuff. You can see it's very difficult to get it off. It's just very, very fine and highly absorbent, so it sticks to things, and be careful when you're using it. Again, a respirator probably wouldn't be a bad idea if you're not used to handling these sorts of things. Okay, and now what did I do with my little stirrer? I don't know where my little stirrer has gotten to, so I'm going to improvise. Got a paintbrush here I'll use the back of. And we're going to mix this, and we want this to be pretty well mixed as a powder before we add any water. And the reason for that is, what I was saying about the salt. So if that salt was all clumped in one spot and it started to dissolve, you're going to wind up getting a little localized region where the plaster sets up on you as you're mixing it, and that wouldn't be good. Also, resist the urge to mix up a big batch of this and keep it as a powder, because the different particle sizes of the plaster and the salt and everything, it's going to separate on you. So if you did that, let's say we made a pickle jar full of this stuff, and not wetting it obviously, you'd have to shake it every time before you used it, and then you're going to have the powders floating around. Don't do that. Just make it as you need it. I didn't try it, but I thought about it, and that's why I'm recommending against it, because as I thought about it, I realized it would absolutely be disastrous. Okay, so that's looking pretty good. I mean, you don't have to go crazy with it, but you want to do your best to get everything kind of mixed up nice and evenly. And I have to find my little, here it is. Okay, I've just got a little spatula here that I'm going to use to mix once I add the water. Now the water is just plain old water. You could use distilled water if you want. I use tap water. I used to use distilled water with pipe mud, and the only reason is I thought it might be more pure, and of course it is, but I drink tap water, so I assume that there's nothing in tap water that's going to hurt me once it's smoked. Plus, the percent impurity in this is so low that it's not going to be an issue. Okay, so let's add some water and start to mix. Now, one thing that's very different about pipe mortar compared to pipe mud is that it is not necessary to get that sort of grainy consistency that you want to get with pipe mud. You actually want this to be more like a clay. So you see I added the water pretty liberally. Now the problem with this, of course, is if you overshoot and you add too much water, you're in trouble because you can't just add more ash to it. But that's not looking bad. Now, I mentioned that you can use the salt crystals kind of as a gauge, so I think I used enough water right off the bat because I'm not seeing any salt crystals in there. I'm just going to try to incorporate all the powder from around the sides here. A little bit of time spent mixing this will pay off well because you want all the ingredients to be well incorporated. And what you're really looking for is something that's more like a smooth clay than that grainy mixture that you would make with pipe mud. So unfortunately there comes a point in this process where you just have to use your hands. I've got to feel it, and I've got to use my fingers to kind of form it and see how it is. And that's not bad. That's actually, you can see it's forming a peak and holding it quite well. You can pick up a chunk of it. That's actually pretty good. Yeah, that's going to gather up everything, make sure that it's all mixed in there. Sorry, I know my fingers are in the way for the most part, but I really don't know how to do this without getting my hand in there. I think that's good. So, yeah, hopefully you can see let me zoom in a bit, and I'll have to remember to zoom out because I often don't, and that's not good. So it's pretty well incorporated. You can see it's a little bit wet. Like when I touch it, you can see some water falling out of it, which is good. You don't want it to be overly wet. All the salt crystals seem to be dissolved, so I think we're good. Now this does not have a terribly long cure time, and you probably have about half an hour, which compared to cigar ash is quite fast. So I wouldn't recommend mixing this up until you're really ready to use it. Oops. Okay, so let's get our water out of here so we don't knock that over. And we will go ahead and add this to the bowl now. So I'm just going to use my fingers. I'm just going to go in and grab it, pick up the whole mess, and stuff it down in there. And now you can use a tamper, or see, I've got a one of these golf tee type tampers. I think, yep, this is actually an Aristocob tamper. How apropos. Let me get the little bowl out of the way here because we don't need it right now. And I'm just going to go in and tamp it. Let's see how that looks. And let me get my finger in there. Kind of go around the sides a bit. I'm just trying to make sure that it's like creeping up on the edges evenly all the way around. And it feels pretty good. And now we'll take our drill bit and go in and use it to reestablish the airway. So that popped right through there. And now what I like to do is I go back in with this spatula and just kind of carve around that, move out the excess, and make sure that we've just got a nice clean hole that goes right into the center. And I'm sorry I can't do that and show you on camera at the same time. I go back in with the drill bit. Yeah, that looks pretty good. So hopefully you'll be able to see what we've got there is a newly formed draft hole that's up from the bottom. I know it's a little bit hard to see. You can kind of see the outer edge, the edge off of this side. The light's just catching that right. And you can kind of see the other side there. And it ends right about the center of the bowl. So that's it. We'll now let this sit overnight. I do think it's probably okay in a couple of hours, but let it sit overnight. And I want to show you one more trick and talk about the one downside that I found with this stuff. And it's actually not a bad downside to have. It turns out that this stuff is really good at seeding cake formation. So what I found is when I used it in patches in the pipes I showed you earlier, the cake was forming really fast on the patches and not on the surrounding wall, not as fast on the surrounding wall. So I fixed that on the Aldo Villani by doing what I'm about to do here. So this is just a little bit of the pipe mud that pipe mortar rather, that I took out when I was forming the draft hole there. And I'm going to add more water to that. And I want to make it like a very thin mixture. So let's start off with a drop or two. Mix that around. Yeah, that's good. And I actually want it to be that thin because what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually paint this on the inside of the bowl with my finger. And I hope I have enough here because I didn't plan to actually do this part, so I probably could have made more. I all I'm doing is getting that on my finger and just kind of smearing it on the inside of the bowl. Now, the truth is, this may not be important on a cob. I just want to show you how I'm doing this. But on a briar pipe, I think it's actually well worth doing if you're refurbishing it, because it's basically a type of bowl coating, and that activated carbon is going to do a nice job of sorry, I keep saying activated carbon, which is correct, although it's sold as activated charcoal. That activated charcoal is going to do a really nice job of helping with your cake formation. And, you know, this is obviously a pretty easy, simple bowl coating recipe that I'd never use on a pipe, a new pipe, but for repairs and stuff. You see, I just smeared it around the inside. It's a very thin coating. But what that's going to do is it's going to make sure that the cake forms as quickly on the sides as it does on the bottom, and that means that you'll just get a nice even formation. Now, having said that, doing this on a corn cob is probably not a brilliant idea, because corn cobs really don't seem to form cake the same way that briar pipes do. But I just wanted to show you that process in case you wanted to use it, or if you do use the pipe mortar in a briar pipe, be sure to do that just to even out the cake formation. So there you have it, folks. Pretty simple, easy process. Same process you would use for mudding the bottom, but mortaring the bottom is I believe, going to be a better, more robust solution. And while it may not make a huge difference when you're mudding a cob versus mortaring a cob, it definitely will make a huge difference if you're fixing a burnout. And I've now switched to the Aldo Villani, and I'm smoking some Sir Walter Raleigh, courtesy of my good friend Gator John, so thank you, John. If you're fixing burnouts like I did with this Villani, or with the Bing's Favorite, I really think it's going to be a better approach than the pipe mud ever could be. So, closing thoughts. First off, the source of carbon. You don't necessarily, well, I don't know. I've only used what I've shown you. I have not tried to use things like cigar ash, pipe, the carbon from cake, and anything like that. If you want to try, experiment with it and let us know if it works. It probably will. I mean, carbon is carbon, so I don't know that it won't work. I like using the activated charcoal because I can always get it, and it's always going to be the same, and you know, that's important to me, to have that continuity. But yeah, play with the recipe. See if you can make it better or easier. The second thing is, please keep in mind this is experimental. I don't yet know that this is something I can recommend that everyone use, but I want to recommend that everyone at least try it so that we can get a sense of how good it works. So try it and let the community know if you've had luck with it. So with that, friends, I'm going to draw this video to a close. I hope you found it helpful. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope that you let us know what you think of pipe mortar. As always, your likes and subscriptions are greatly appreciated, and your comments are always welcome, and I look forward to them after every video. So with that, I hope you all take care of yourselves, have a great week ahead, and until we speak again, I will look forward to talking to you all again very soon. Goodbye now.